So good to see you.
You too. Oh, yeah. All right. Hi. All right, here we go. Hi, Jeremy. Hi. Okay, is Caroline here? I'm sure she is. There she is. Okay,
Yes,
all
I
people
am.
here.
Welcome back,
Okay,
Rabbi David,
good.
and Hag Sameach to you.
Thanks to you. Shabbos, good Shabbos. Are we ready to do the blessings? Or did you do them already?
No.
Okay. 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishanu b'tzvotav v'tzivanu לעשות בדברי Torah. Amen. Okay, so I thought we would we'd look at a theme that I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks, but I'll be frank with you, it's been hard to focus a little bit on preparing, so I hope that the preparation is not
This will Nicole Aram, please.
a little bit louder. Okay, yeah. So let's look at the text. I wanted to look at the idea that I've seen. I took a class with someone or one of my colleagues, Rabbi Elliot Ginsburg, years ago, and I wanted to talk about the word Pesach a little bit and the word Chipazon, these two really important words in the story of the Passover story. Pesach meaning, well, we'll see what it means, and Chipazon also, which means in a hurried way. There's something about jumping and skipping and limping that are like that's my story for the last month. But I think that something also about Pesach thematically that also worked into that, the theme of the word Piseach. Oh well, gracias. So let's look at source number one. Does everybody have it, Jay? Guys, everybody has the source in the PDF, and also I didn't send you the link. Okay, I'm sorry. The link. Okay, hopefully those who use the link will forgive me. I didn't get the link over there. Okay, so source one. Everybody sees source number one on the page. This is from Parshat Bo, or the parsha known as Bo, Come to Pharaoh. Chapter 12 is the entire chapter 12 of Exodus is all about the Paschal rite or the offering, right? So that's where we learned that Moses comes to the people and he says to them, right, tells them the laws of HaChodesh Ezelechem Rosh Chodeshim, the new month, and then he gives them the instructions on how to create the Paschal offering for that year. Now, before we begin, I just want to say that, hey, Osvaldo, I want to say that there's a distinction made in rabbinic sources between the Pesach of Egypt, known as Pesach Mitzrayim, the original Pesach, and then the continued commemoration and celebration of that ritual, of that original moment. It's called Pesach Dorot. It literally means Pesach of the generations. In other words, the first instantiation of this had unique features, according to the rabbis, and future generations had a different set of rules and obligations around Pesach and the Paschal offering. Okay, not some important distinctions that we'll see in a moment, but most of it is like 95% of it is exactly the same. But let's look at one. Can you still hear me? Yeah, I'm trying.
That's better.
Better? Okay. And then someone says, "Stop yelling at me because I'll forget that I'm talking to you, and then I'll talk to you." What are you yelling at me for? All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's look at source number one. This is chapter 12, verse 11, 12 and 13. Okay. Vekacha tochlu oto, and this way, kacha is it's a great Hebrew word, like this way or thus, right? Kacha, this way. Tochlu oto, you shall eat it. Matnechem chagurim, your loins are girded. Does anybody know what that means? To gird your loins? a great phrase, girding the loins.
The hem of the garment is brought up around the waist to protect the body.
To protect the body, but also to allow you to walk, like get ready to go, like, pull up your pants, as it were, like, and gird yourself, maybe even belt yourself, like get ready so things don't fall down when you're walking, right? That kind of thing. Nalechem biraglechem, your shoes have to be on your feet. Umakelchem v'yedchem. I mean, this is literally a list of things. Go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, right? There are these. I mean, if you're a literalist, maybe these are the three things, right? But the general sense here, and by the way, makelchem b'yedchem, and your staff, right? I brought mine, right? You have your shtekel with you, right? Ve'achaltem oto b'chipazon. You are to eat it in chipazon. Chipazon, in haste, hurriedly, like, the way that your parents told you not to eat, right? Or the way that nutritionists, like, don't eat when you're hurried. So you have to eat it quickly. Pesach hu l'Adonai. This is the strange three set of words. It is a Paschal Pesach, a Passover offering. It is for God. Okay, not clear what that means exactly. It is a Paschal. It's the first usage of that term. Is that related to the quickness? Is that related to, is that just a known, that's its proper name? It's called a Passover offering, and it is for whom? For Adonai. Okay. Why? So now, verse 12 says, "V'avarti b'eretz Mitzrayim v'layla hazeh." I'll go through the land. I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night. V'layla hazeh. On that night, I will go through the land of Egypt. V'hiketi kol bechor b'eretz Mitzrayim, and I will strike. I will hit. The word hit here, but also makam means a plague. I will plague each of the firstborn children in the land of Egypt, me adam yad be'ema, from human to animal, ubechol Elohim Mitzrayim aseh shvatim, and with all of the gods of Egypt, the powers of Egypt, I will judge, I will hand out, I will act with them in justice and judgment. I am God. Ani Adonai. Verse 13. V'haya hadam lachem laos, and the blood will be for you. The blood will be for you a sign, an oath. Al habatim asher atem sham, on the homes that you are in, where you are, on the homes where you are located. V'ra'isi es adam, and I will see the blood. Ufasachti alechem, and I will jump over you. I will skip over you. I will Pesach over you. I'll be Poseach. V'lo yevahem negev, and for you there will not be a plague, lemashchit, to destroy, v'hakoti v'eretz Yisrael, when I strike the land of Egypt. So these three verses are like pretty instructive in terms of understanding the word Pesach and its context in the Paschal offering, and also in its meaning. It's like, so what do we know from these three verses? We know that we have to eat the Pesach in Egypt in a particular way. The verse 11 lets us know that the way that we eat it is chipazon-esque. Chipazon meaning hurry, rushing, right? And it's also interesting because you have to be ready to rush. In other words, you have to be ready, right? He's giving them instructions. It's going to be a rush at the end. You can't slow down, so make sure you're ready, because when it happens, you got to go.
Prepare to be unprepared.
Prepared to be unprepared. Prepared to be unprepared, and prepared to be rushed, right? Prepared to hurry up. And then somehow the word Pesach gets connected in verse 11 to that rushing itself, right? You're rushing. That would have been fine. The verse should have ended at that point. But then somehow the rushing, then it's almost like is there like an ellipsis there? Is there some like colon? There's no punctuation. But Pesach hu l'Adonai. It is Passover for Yud He Vav He. It's weird also because, I mean, the simple meaning could just be that this is Moses announcing this is what's called a Pesach offering for God, right? For God doesn't mean for God. It means, right, that this is the Paschal offering that will be a part of this Yud Hey Vav Hey ritual for forever, or this is what we're calling it, because you might not know what we're calling it. It's called the Pesach. And then after verse 11 ends, then chapter 12, verse 12 and 13, then unpack what that means, that it's why it's called that, right? But and then, right, God says, Moses relays in the first person, right? God is saying to them, I will then traverse through the land. This is what's going to happen. There's going to be this Makah Bechorot, right? This firstborn plague. And then verse 13 returns to the Pesach theme and the explication of what that word means. And it gives more understanding to it. It says, when there'll be blood on the houses, and I see it, I will Pesach. I will jump over you, right? And in that way, right, the jumping over is sparing you. And that's what this offering is called, right? That offering is called a Pesach offering, a jumping over offering. Now, what's remarkable, there's so many remarkable things here, and you'll see in a second with Rashi and so on, and what people make of this. But what's remarkable here is the entire holiday becomes called, this moment is the whole holiday, right? Pesach is, it's not a why not call it the holiday, like freedom holiday, like the whole way that it's constructed, again, as academics or those who are critical, maybe there are much more elegant answers to this, right? It was already, maybe a ritual or a holiday of the firstborn lambs or whatever it might be. But just for us, we take it for granted that this whole holiday of freedom is related to this word that relates to the last of the Makot. Like, what does Pesach have to do with the first 9 Makot? The first 9 plagues have nothing to do with Pesach. Pesach is uniquely connected to this jumping over houses business, and that becomes the most important name of the holiday and the most important verb of the holiday, to do the Pesach offering, right? You have to, it becomes the most important prism through which to understand Passover itself in the mind of the rabbis and in the mind of the Torah itself. And so that's 1. 2, what is this chipazon business? Like this hurrying up business that, why not say that, I don't know about you, but if I was going to show might in Egypt, I would say to them, I'm gonna jump over the houses, and then I'm gonna cover you. Take your time. You're free people already. You're free. Nothing's gonna happen to you. You want to know the experience of Pesach, right? You go out slowly, like you got nothing to worry about. You got the biggest, goons in the business. We do protection for business. That's what we do. We're gonna protect you. And God says, I'm your protector, so take your time. Don't rush. Walk slowly, right? I'm big enough to support that. But why does God demand that there is a quality connected to, I'm going to jump over and you're going to rush? I'm jumping over, then I say go, and you rush out. And that also connects, of course, to matzah, because one of the reasons why we say we eat matzah is because we didn't have time for it. It should have been brioche all the way. Croissants all the way. It's like, you've been eating matzah because you're a bunch of slaves. I'm going to do all the business with the Makah Bechorot. At that point, they're going to know how strong I am. And then you guys take your time. You got some things in the oven. Just make sure you're out, give it a. So the whole thing is so remarkable. And just to underscore that last piece before we go into some of the Rashi and some of the other things, it's nothing like the way that we're supposed to observe Pesach going forward. Right? If you think about the Passover Seder, you don't think you're in a rush at all, other than to get to the food, right? To everybody, hurry up, hurry up and eat, right? When are we going to eat? But there's actually, the halacha of the Seder is that you are supposed to elongate the Seder. You're supposed to relax, you're supposed to eat when you're reclining, so that you act with derech melachim, it's called, in the way of kings. You take out your finest cutlery, your finest dishes if you can, because you're supposed to be royalty, right? In the way of the Greek symposia, we are reclining, we have time to think, right? And in fact, we're even told that there's a mitzvah to make the Seder go as long as possible, like in the Atkins family, like you're going to experience it. We have to go, the longer the Seder is, the better it is. Until we even have an example of that in the Haggadah that was included by the rabbis, 5 rabbis who were living in the town of Bnei Brak, and they were talking about the Seder all night until their students came to them and said, hey, hurry up, the sun's coming up, Shema, you have to say the Shema in the morning, right? So all these things just together.
Don't you always say Shema in the morning?
No, but they were worried, of course, right, but they were worried that the rabbis were so engrossed in the telling them they were going to miss it. They're going to miss the moment. So that's amazing. So all of this in this one series of a series of 3 verses, and I want to okay, you can stop there. And I mean, I have a lot to connect this to, but I asked a lot of questions. Yeah.
So east and west, all is best. From the eastern standpoint, you have Krishna on the Ganges playing his flute to the gopis, the milkmaids, and that's foreplay is everything. In the west, in this teaching, pacing is everything. And so on the one hand, you have be still and know that I am God, and you have Hillel brilliantly saying, if you push against time, time pushes against you. And then on the other hand, you have this rushing. And so I think we're supposed to get used to mixing it up when it comes like a good running back, looking for daylight where you're suddenly stopping even, but you're rushing ahead. I mean, it's like a good run.
Yeah. So it's good. I mean, I love, so I'm obviously, just to give you a sense of like a meta sense of what's happening this morning, is that like usually in these classes, especially the bigger, longer ones, I'm setting up rhetorical questions that I obviously have thought through, and I will be offering a number of answers to the questions that I've set up from the traditions of the last 2,000 years. A number of them about 1,000 years old, and 1 or 2 of them, and then a couple hundred years old, and then we can also explore what they said, and then also go back to the original questions. And this is certainly a good way to start. Like one answer can be that all of Pesach as the most important holiday of the Jewish people, it's really the place where the nation of Israel, as it were, is formed, is there's a unique, the fundamental tension in pacing is being highlighted. Like at various moments, as you said, a running back, it's great to bring when you're looking for daylight or looking for an opening, you have to employ many different tachbulot, a lot of different skills and a lot of different styles.
A lot of different paces, a lot of slowing in fast.
But I want to underscore, that's going to come up, and I want to underscore the pacing, and I want to frame also, broaden the lens here to include, right, that sometimes we jump, sometimes we run, sometimes we walk, sometimes we limp, and a lot of that is being played off of here. Whether it's intentional or not, we can just let that be. I'm not interested in that question, frankly, but certainly the tradition of the last 2,000 years is interested in reading it that way. That there's something about Egypt and the origin story that has to do with jumping or skipping, and something about it also that has to do with rushing, and also, right, other elements, limping, right? All of that is of a piece, and you'll see in a couple of these interpretations that how they work with this question. There's going to be a moral way to work with it. There's going to be a Kabbalistic way to work with it, and we'll come back to that. Okay, I want to go to 2 people online, and then come back to Thomas. And quick question with Thomas, then go to Jay and Richard. Okay, and then we got to go forward. We got to skip forward. Yeah.
Just complicating the reason of the verse, is there something about, presumably God and the angel of death know which house is which,
Right.
and which one to skip over.
Right.
So why the necessity of the marking?
Right. Why the necessity of the marking? We'll come back to that. Okay. Good question. That's the pshat. That's like what we call a pshat question. Like in the simple meaning of the text, what's the significance of this, especially when it comes to this makkah? We don't find in any of the other makkot, makkah means plague or makkot, plagues in the plural. We don't find by any of the prior 9 plagues that the Israelites had to do anything in particular.
Yeah.
Right? None of the prior 9 plagues. There's something about this which becomes, again, and especially easier if you think about it as a psycho-spiritual conversation as opposed to the moral conundrum of it, of actually what happened. But like something about this story says that by the last plague, we must participate in our own liberation as opposed to the prior 9, which is also part of this skipping business and so on. Okay. Jay, and then Richard, and then back to Rashi.
I have a comment that's predicated on a yes/no answer to a question. The question is matzah. Typically in English, it's translated as bread of affliction. Does that intimate that matzah was always what we ate as slaves? Because my understanding of matzah was it was a one-time thing because we didn't have time for leavening.
Yeah, that itself is a source of great debate. There are generally understood to be 2 opposing reasons for matzah. One is it reminds us of affliction, and the rushing out of Egypt an affliction. So the answer often given is no, it's not in particular. Actually, that's where it is a liberation device, because in other words, only free people can, it's a sign of our having to leave, but that's a good thing. And so, freedom means leaving behind slavery, even if it means you don't have time for the bread to rise. And the suffering is that slaves, at least this is one interpretation of the Talmud, and then later sources, that slaves eat things like matzah because it actually, you can eat a piece of it and it can hold you over until your next meal, because it's very, as we all know, it can be very filling and stay for a while. So that's so it holds both of those things in it, both freedom and also the suffering of Egypt.
So going with my traditional Hebrew school understanding of the fact that also we didn't have time for leavening and baking our bread and all that, I'm fascinated by this separation between the original Pesach and Pesach for generations. And I take this contrast with the hurrying and all that with, relaxing, leaning back, going through slowly, etc. But in terms of what we ingest and the Seder plate and the rituals that we point to, there is matzah. So even in this point of view or instruction in generations to relax and take your time, we still have the reminder of the matzah. We still have the reminder of sometimes the need for hurrying and jumping and whatever.
Absolutely. We'll get all of that exactly. You'll see we're going to unpack that distinction between the original and the future as well. We'll see a Torah that we've taught in the shul a couple of times from Rav Tzadok Cohen. We'll see that, and yeah, of course, it's still on the table. We tell the story, but we don't. We tell the story slowly, even though the story is a story of having to hurry, and the matzah is certainly there. The matzah has so many meanings. It's even the word oni, which means affliction, in the mind of the rabbis becomes lechem she'onim alav devarim harbe. It becomes the answering matzah. Matzah becomes the answer. The word oni, which means suffering, becomes la'anot, which means to answer something. And in the mind of the rabbi, the matzah that we break is the matzah that speaks. Like, it's like in being interrogated, and it finally breaks. And then it gives us its wisdom. And that's, right, the matzah, broken matzah, only a broken matzah can begin to tell the story. Wow. And that's where the affliction matzah becomes also the witnessing matzah, the matzah that tells us of its secrets. And that's a brilliant insight from the rabbis. And that's why we actually break the matzah at the moment of it being called the matzah of affliction. Right? We say, halach anya de achilu abatana de Mitzrayim. So that's the answer to you, Jay, that at the Seder we have this beginning right before Yachatz, which is the third step in the Seder, the fourth step rather. And Yachatz tells us, halach ma'anya, this is the bread of anya, of affliction, that we ate in the land of Egypt. We say that in Aramaic, and it's not connected to this is the bread of running out. It doesn't, so there's a lot there, and it's very, very, very beautiful. We'll come back to that. Okay, Richard.
Good to see you're feeling better, David. This part of the story, the mythology of the Exodus and its celebration at a Passover Seder is the part of it that most deeply disturbs me. It is the moral question, which I know you're not directly focusing on now. But the story of the Exodus could have been told in a way in which the death of so many people could have been avoided. I understand it's a mythology, and we're not to take it quite literally, but nonetheless, mythologies are important in the way in which people celebrate their lives, their holidays, their cultures. This one is deeply, deeply disturbing and almost seems to me at times to be a gratuitous infliction that was unnecessary in the mythology to make the larger point about the affliction of the Israelites in Egypt. And I know some people skip it. When they're doing the Seder, they don't recite the 10th plague. And I sympathize with that. I mean, I do recite it, but I sympathize with that because of the depth of cruelty that is involved in this particular part of the mythology. And it almost makes me seem that the need to hurry up to get out is because of guilt, because in a sense, the Egyptians are going to be really aggravated, and rightfully so. And they're going to come after you. Now, so God has to take the second step of the Sea of Reeds and all that stuff. But it's really, to me, a deeply disturbing part of the mythology and the ritual itself now, because as you've just pointed out, how central the Pesach offering is to the way in which the story unfolds, as well as the way in which we observe the holiday at home. Thank you.
Yeah. What can I say? I think that, that question is an absolutely core question around all of the texts of terror in all of the religious traditions. And so I guess there are a lot of very classic moves that people do. Like one move would be to acknowledge it, and then to, acknowledge it and keep going. Another way to do that is to say that, as soon as you abstract it into a myth, you also say to yourselves, well, it doesn't have only one pedagogical, goal, or one pedagogical gift that it offers. It offers multiple pedagogical gifts. On the one hand, you can go see whether or not, whether or not it really is dangerous. Like, did the Jewish culture, do other cultures kill firstborns because of this myth? Definitely, historically, the answer to that would be no. And we can say for reasons maybe they didn't have power, others didn't have power. But one other variable that would come up would come to bear is that it actually underscores what the Jews or the Israelites thought was a moral universe, where there was karma. And given that the story begins with the genocide of Israelite babies by the Egyptian culture, right? In the end of the story, the penultimate moment is that you get what you sow. Now, we can say that we don't believe in revenge, or that the God of revenge is not a God that I believe in. And trust me, I'm not someone who desires God's revenge to look like human revenge. I kind of hope that God's revenge is something that I can't actually imagine, and maybe then we wouldn't call it revenge. But I can certainly imagine that for the Israelites, under 400 years or 200 years of slavery that began with this genocidal infanticide, that this God who recalls that war sin of the Egyptians meets that out in that worldview. And I guess the next thing I would say is that it's very difficult not to slide into multiple frames of anachronism, because the minute we start to judge like a 2,000 or 3,000-year-old story by our own moral standards, we have to apply that at every single moment along the story and continue that theme, or we wind up losing sight of where we wind up, do you know what I mean? We inadvertently give a pass to one part of the story that feels like it belongs in our worldview, and then another. Like, so in my universe, the entire Bible is, most of it has to be refracted, and I struggle with the Akedah, but I also struggle with like a God who talks to snakes, and if I'm going to use one frame of moral clarity without also applying it in a very uniform way at every moment, every single story, then I wind up having to ask myself, what exactly is bothering me here? Is it just that it feels so clearly wrong here, but other things feel less clearly wrong? that's what I kind of remind myself. I'm kind of out loud talking to Richard, but I'm saying, giving you like how I work with these pieces to try to stay in some connection between the past and my own present morally. And yeah, of course, like nobody wants to see any innocent person, God forbid, all of that is deeply problematic to us, especially as we talk. Another moral here could also be that there are no liberations without very, very morally problematic moments. Another piece around that it's very hard to imagine this liberation which isn't somehow has collateral, consequences. I mean, these are big moral questions that you raise, as usual, Richard, very intellectually complicated, and thank you for surfacing it. I'm going to go back for the moment into the word Pesach and to this other category called skipping and jumping, if it's okay. So let's look at source number 2, Pesach Hu L'Adonai. Rashi says, when Rashi comes to explain Pesach Hu L'Adonai, that in the very first verse it says, hurry up and eat the matzah, or I'm sorry, hurry up and leave, right? As you have to eat it in a hurried way. It is a Pesach. Rashi says, you see on the bottom of source 2, Pesach HaKorban, the sacrifice, the offering, is called Pesach, which is an allusion to these two words, dilug v'psicha. Dilug means to skip, and psicha means to pass over, like posech. Shakadosh Baruch Hu haya medaleg batei Yisrael mibein batei Mitzrayim, that God, the Holy One of Blessing, passed over the houses of the Israelites in between the houses of the Egyptians, right? The kofetz, it jumps mi Mitzri le Mitzri, jumping from one Egyptian to another, ubi Yisrael emsa'i nimlat, and the Israelite that's in the middle, right, can escape, right? And then he adds this, ve'atem asu kol avodotav l'shem shamayim, derech dilug ukfitza, zecher lishmo shekarui Pesach. The Gam Pasqua, or I guess the term for Passover festival, it's also in French, in Provence, it was also the term to spring. He adds this little coda. All of you now, all of us have to do the work of serve God in the same way God passed over the homes of the Egyptians. We have to be in service of God in a way of skipping and jumping, which is to honor the name of heaven. In other words, to do it for the sake of God. Now, that little Rashi coda there is really, talk about in Jewish history what we make of that. That somehow we are to mirror in our service of God the jumping and the skipping that was also in this jumping and skipping of God. Like you're a dancer, Amy, like what does that mean? Like people are looking at going, Rashi, are you saying that we call it Passover for two reasons? One is to honor God's action, but also to pledge our own mirroring and parallel service of God. We are to serve God in the way God served us by jumping and skipping in our service of God. What does that mean? I remember when I read that the first time, I was like, you just threw me. I was sort of with you, and then you jumped, and now I'm a little bit lost.
It's his mustard seed. It's his
Let's keep going. Let's keep going, because we're already like, what time is it?
Time to keep going.
We got to keep going. Yeah, what time is it? I mean, is it 9:30 yet? 9:40? Oh my goodness, we're so late. Okay. So now, when Rashi comes to the third verse, and God says, I will jump over, right? Right? If you look back to verse 13 just to follow this. So Rashi on the first verse says it is called Pesach because God jumped, right? And God skipped. And then in the third verse where it says, when I see the blood, I will jump over you, but it doesn't say over your home, it says over you, right? Ufasachti alechem, over you, right? Rashi adds this little, interpretive crutch or cane or aid. V'chamalti, I will spare you, right? I will have compassion on you. V'domer lo pesach pasoch v'imlit. In the book of Isaiah it says, sparing and delivering, right? V'ani omer, he says, I say, Kol psicha leshon dilug ukfitza. He says, I don't think it means to spare or to have compassion. I think it means to jump and to skip, right? Like there is a phrase in modern Hebrew. It's from the Tanakh, and you can use it in modern Hebrew. When somebody is trying to hold on to two different twigs, meaning trying to hold on to two paths, right? Two things. It's poser ashtei sifim. What would be the modern Hebrew of it, Jeremy? I know you're mid-bite. What is poser ashtei sifim? It's like trying to hold two things at once. You're ambivalent, or you're like, you can't decide. It's stretching between one thing and another, right? You're holding these two things. Now, we got to go. So this is Rashi's general thing, is that Pesach has everything to do with skipping over and jumping. Now, look at source number 5. And here's where it gets really interesting. This is from the 13th century. This commentary is from the 19th century, but it's quoting something from much earlier. And here is where the jumping and the skipping are going to be the first framing of it, which means, everybody with me? It is not the action of God, as it were, over the Egyptian homes, but rather it is the emergency measures God does for the Israelites who are not worthy of being redeemed. Watch this move. Watch this move carefully. So in the Torah, the word Pesach seems to be the action of the God who is willing to jump over the homes of the people because what? Because we actually deserve it because of an action we took. Remember that whole action? We slaughtered the lamb. I will see the blood. You deserve to be redeemed because you took an action. Remember, like the first 9, there was no action. But on the 10th one, God says, are you ready to be redeemed? And God said, and we say, yeah, we're ready. We're going to do something really difficult that participates in our own liberation. And that will be, I have to move, I'm sorry. That will be a sign of your readiness to be redeemed. Right? So we are worthy of it. And God says, this one you have to earn. No more free gifts. No more first 9 plagues that happen. You've seen enough. You've seen enough to really believe that when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to give you a test to see if you really believe it and are ready. And God says, go do something really difficult. Take the God of Egypt, slaughter it, bring it to your home, and then slaughter it. And then, and only then, I will jump over your home. I will distinguish between, right, the Israelite and the Jew. And there the word jumping and skipping is rooted in what? In being worthy. I will jump over and I will skip over Pesach, and forever you will remember this because you were ready. And my skipping and jumping was directly related to your actions. And somewhere in this, a rabbinic tradition is born that the Israelites were no better than the Egyptians. They were completely and totally submerged in all of the idolatry of Egypt. Somewhere in the rabbinic tradition over the course of, right, it's also, by the way, in the Bible. I'm saying the rabbis didn't make it up out of nowhere. There are places in the Bible where we're told to put away our Egyptian gods and the Egyptian ways and so on. There are other prophets. So there is a sense that we were, and this is kind of a moral dilemma, we were no better, as it were, than our own oppressors from the perspective of our worthiness. If worthiness means that we were monotheists and we had held on to the ways of our ancestors, somewhere along the way, the rabbis construct a narrative where what God does for the Jewish people is not because they have done the worthy thing, but God saves them at the last moment from complete and utter spiritual annihilation. And in that tradition, the rabbis imagine that the Israelites were at the 49th level. There are 50 levels of holiness, and connected to that, there are 50 levels of impurity. The rabbis say that the Israelite nation was at the 49th level of impurity. And what God jumps over and what God skips over is a normal cause and effect chain that would lead to their worthiness. Because God loved them so much, God was willing to overlook and skip over the normal means of liberation to give them a gift. And that gift was freedom. And in that tradition, as you'll see in a second, right? The dilug and the kfitzah, God's jumping over and God's skipping, is another word for what later in Christian theology becomes grace that is unattended to and not unconnected, disconnected from acts. Right? Why are you worthy of liberation? You are not. But I love you. Because you're my child and you're my people, as it were. And this becomes a metaphor for God's love that is not contingent on, right, on anything. And it becomes, in the language of the Kabbalists, God's very Protestant, it becomes the language of the rabbis. It becomes, in the language of the rabbis, a free handout, a spiritual welfare state, as it were. You don't deserve it, but I'm going to give you a hand so that you can get ahead. Let's look at this, because this is remarkable. Look at this. You have to see this, but you have to see this. I'm sorry, I know, but I have to do this. I'll come back to you. I promise. I promise. Look at Zohar Chadash. Certainly when the Israelites were in Egypt, they defiled and contaminated themselves with every type of impurity until they were submerged under the 49 levels of impurity. This is from the latter part of the 13th century. The Holy One, blessed be He, extracted them from under the worship of all these impure forces. However, it does not explicitly state that if they had remained longer, they would have descended into the 50th gate. But in the Sidur of the Ari, which is, right, the Ari Zal is Rabbi Isaac Luria from the 16th century. The Ari writes in the Passover Haggadah commentary on this matzah that we eat, meaning matzah zusha an ochlim, it's a part of the Haggadah. It is written that there are 50 gates of impurity, and had the Israelites delayed even one more moment, they would never have been redeemed, sinking permanently into the 50th gate. And similarly, the book Chesed Avram states explicitly, know that there was a Kabbalistic tradition among our sages that Israel became so defiled by the abominations of Egypt that on the eve of Passover they entered the 49th chamber of impurity, and had they, God forbid, delayed any longer, they would have entered the 50th chamber from which there would have been no eternal remedy. This is the secret behind the phrase, if the Holy One, blessed be He, had not taken us out of Egypt, we and our children's children would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. And thus the exodus from Egypt is mentioned exactly 50 times in the Torah. According to this tradition, the Yetziat Mitzrayim is mentioned 50 times in the Torah because the exodus from Egypt is mentioned 50 times in the Torah because there are 50 levels of impurity and enslavement, and that God jumped over our 49 levels of impurity in order to save us at the last moment. And the reason why we had to hurry out of Egypt now is not, right? Now we understand why we had to hurry out of Egypt. Because God said, if we don't get them out now, they're going to be dead. We got to get them out.
So the Red Sea was going to be parting at a particular time
to get us there. But God says, hurry up, because if you stay any longer, right, I won't be able to save you. Right, and so the rushing here that becomes the matzah that Jay was mentioning earlier, the rushing here is not hurry up, get out because right, gesundheit. In this tradition, the rushing is because God says one more minute in Egypt and that's it, you're done. You got to hurry up. I got to get you out. And the dilug and the kfitzah, the jumping and the skipping, is another way of saying God is willing to ignore your worthiness in order to give you a gift. Now, if you look at source numbers, turn the page. Turn the page. It says Agra de Kala. Do you see that? Bo 35. This is what that earlier commentary was commenting on. This is from the great Hasidic master, the Dinav Rebbe, the Bnei Saskar, Rav Tzvi Elimelech of Dinav.
Dinover?
From Dinov, D-I-N-O-V, also known as the lineage of Munkach later on.
Come over for dinner.
And you shall eat it in haste, a leap unto the Lord. Dilug hu l'Adonai, greatness preceding smallness by miraculous means. Thus you shall eat it hastily. Let the wise understand this and remain silent. When you contemplate this matter, you will understand the significance of your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Similarly, consider the verse, and I will pass through the land of Egypt this night. I will transcend, as it were, the usual order of justice and nature. manifesting greatness before smallness, specifically on this night. But afterwards, the order returns gradually to its original state, level after level. Similarly, in this day shall be unto you for a memorial, meaning every year on this night, a spiritual elevation occurs above. Greatness precedes smallness and subsequently returns step by step to its natural order until the festival Shavuot, when the bride fully enters the wedding canopy. What is the Munkatcher Rebbe saying? Right, the commentary that we just learned before is trying to unpack this. In Kabbalah, there's a notion of gadlut and katnut, maturity and immaturity. In the language of Kabbalah, we proceed towards spiritual evolution one stage at a time, from small mind to big mind, from meditating on the daily activities to the sublime until we arrive at greatness. We don't arrive in one moment at the Buddha's insights. We don't arrive in one moment in liberation. We have to work at our liberation in a methodical daily ritual. But he says there is a miracle where great mind or greatness or big mind, or what he means here, grace or divine connection, happens without any work. He says it happened once. Anyway, maybe it happens all the time, but he's saying that's the meaning of God jumping over. We can use Protestant language of right, grace without acts, but you can also use meditative or contemplative models and say that you can have a deep insight, right? And it can annoy you. You can be like Salieri and Mozart, where he's thinking, this kid with his mouth, his dirty mouth, this is the genius that God, or he was saying, Jesus, you gave your gift, your charisma to this. He was born like that. What kind of charisma? Like, I'm Salieri, I'm working, I went to school, and everything I produce is mediocre. But this kid shows up one day, this immature imbecile, and every note is a divine gift. Did he work a day in his life? He doesn't have any calluses on his soul or on his body or on his hands. And so the Munkatcher, Bnei Salvador says that Pesach here is not about God jumping over houses. It's about the neshama of a human being, in this case a Jew, but like human beings, that there's a night called Pesach, the night of jumping, where you can have in one moment a spiritual insight that changes your life forever.
Sudden awakening.
And then a sudden awakening, which then leads, this is how he understands, therefore he understands then the 7-week progression from the second night of Pesach all the way to Shavuot. He says, one night a year, right? One night of Pesach, we jump. Wherever you are, you're brought into the heaven, you're brought into the palace of the king, the queen, the divine one. And no matter how bad things have been, no matter where you've been, no matter how low you've been, how enslaved you've been, how deluded you've been, it drops like this on this night. And then on the second night, we pick up a 49-day journey, which begins at the lowest level, chesed shebechesed. Really, it should start malchut shebemalchut, but that's another conversation. But it starts 49. It starts in 49. You have a 49-day journey to now do in the normal seder, in the normal order, what on the night of the seder is out of order, shalot keseder, right? And that's the inside of the Kabbalists. And that's their radical, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but it was news to me, that the whole night of the Seder is out of order. The Seder is order, the word Seder means order, but if you imagine that God drops all of this divine gift, right, in the unusual way in which it's usually earned, level by level, but it comes as if, he says, where the greatness comes before the smallest, meaning the end is given in the beginning, then it's not Seder, it's out of order. You see that? So the normal Seder is you do it this way. This is how instructions start with A and you get to Z. He says the Seder night is Z. It comes down, the Gadlut comes before the Katnut. The maturity, the adult mind, the big comes before. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. And so he says the whole night of Pesach is not about, right, a jumping over of houses, but a jumping over of the way that you normally think things have to unfold. And ultimately what it means is, open yourself up to be surprised by a miracle. Open yourself up to be surprised by a miracle. Now, that is not the only way to understand this, right? I want to give you, based on this, another beautiful Hasidic reading. We're not going to make it all the way through, because I have no idea what time it is, and I'm supposed to.
Not that late.
What time is it? I am b'chibazon. What time?
9:40.
9:40. Okay. I have to read to you this one in English, but it's from a modern Satmar Chassid, and he takes this insight of the greatness coming before the smallness, or the maturity coming before the immaturity, or the adult coming before the child, or the grace coming before the works, whatever frame you want to use. And he connects it to something else, which is very real for me and for a lot of us in today and tomorrow and every day. Okay, so let's hold on to this Hasidic teaching. Okay, ready? We're on the next page where it says Avnei Tepetz, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Brody, a 21st century Satmar Chassid, who is going to take this insight and bring it even deeper. For me, personally, I think. He says, perhaps one can suggest by way of remez, of hint, to interpret the verse in our portion, and thus shall you eat it, you shall eat it in haste. It is a Pesach, right, offering to Hashem, to God. And when Rashi explained the word Pesach, it is for Hashem, the offering is called Pesach. You shall perform all its rituals for the sake of heaven in a manner of jumping and leaping, commemorating God's name, which is called passing over or jumping. Remember that odd little Rashi coda where Rashi said, just as God jumped, you should jump in your service of God? This is how he's going to explain it. For at that time, when Israel departed from Egypt, they were immersed in the 49 gates of impurity. You can see in the 21st century impact of a 13th century rabbinic idea, right? You see that? This idea that Israel, when they left Egypt, were at the 49th gate of impurity, and they found themselves in a very low spiritual state. This condition might naturally lead a person to despair. This is where it becomes Hasidic. You see that? So he says, feeling that you're at your last rung before you're done, before you hit rock bottom, that can lead you to give up, to despair, wondering how it could ever be possible to elevate oneself and achieve, right, ultimate perfection, or to be free. Let's say to be free, right? So all of a sudden now, what becomes a very radical spiritual idea now becomes a deeply sensitive spiritual, psycho-spiritual idea. You can feel so desperate, and you see the world around you going to shit in a handbasket, and you think to yourself, and you see yourself falling, and you're like, I'm not ready to be free. Maybe we're not ready to be free. Maybe we'll never be free. And that can lead to a psychological state of despair, of Yeush in Hebrew, like you give up. You throw your hands up, you say, I can't. I'll never be free. Therefore God said to Israel, you are my beloved children. Do all of your sacred service for the sake of heaven, even if it comes through jumping and leaping. This means that even if one falls and cannot maintain consistent spiritual standing, you fall, you break your hip, you're limping. And every spiritual effort
Personal.
feels like leaping, ascending briefly only to fall again. Here, you see this? He adds this piece that is not, none of us were thinking that jumping and leaping has to also do with falling and limping. He says that when Rashi added in the 11th century that the name Pesach is about God, but it's not just about remembering God's jumping, but a commandment to us or an invitation to us to also jump and leap in the way we serve God. He connects it now to the 49th level of spiritual impurity, to God's grace, and to our own spiritual advice.
Wow.
You're going to rise, God says, be a Pesacher. Be somebody who jumps and leaps, because you know, even when you know you're going to fall again, that you won't stand on one place, but you'll fall. Life will be full of these moments of fracture and fissure, but also faith will allow you then to regain your footing. And that's what it is to be a Pesach person. Each spiritual effort feels like a leap, like you ascend briefly only to fall again. Even this is deeply valued by God, he says. And as a remembrance of the spiritual principle, the offering is called Pesach, signifying skipping and leaping. Now he says, however, in the holy books of the Menachem Mendel of Rimonov, it says, I am Hashem your God, to explain the verse in Tehillim, who may ascend the mountain of God, and who may stand firm in God's holy place. Now this is a beautiful verse in Psalm 24. It says, Mi yaleh b'har Adonai, u'mi yakum b'mkom kodsho. Who will ascend? Mi ya'aleh. Who will ascend to the mountain of God? And then the very next verse, which seems like just another beautiful poetic way of saying the same thing. Umi yakum b'mkom kasha. Who will yakum? Who will stand up in the makom, in the place of God's holiness? It's a rhetorical question in this poem of Psalm 24. And then he gives the answer. Somebody who is this, this, and this. But those two questions, me and me, who will and who will, is really interesting. Because the Rimanover, this Hasidic Rebbe, will say that these are actually not the same. It's not the same question. Who will ascend is the question of who will ascend, right? What are the qualities of somebody who ascends but then descends? And what are the qualities of somebody who can yakum, who can stand firm in the place of holiness? He doesn't see them as poetically repetitive. He sees them as two distinct moments. Who can ascend, but then also once having ascended can also stand and remain there, be there for a while. Right? Now, but his answer, look at what his answer is. This Menachem Mendel of Rimanov says, the true spiritual goal must not be only to ascend, but to remain elevated without falling. This is the meaning of who may ascend. One may find those who can ascend, but who may stand firm in God's holy place refers to those who manage to hold their spiritual gains permanently. The lesson we take from this is that the genuine aspiration should be for ascent and permanence, to never fall from one spiritual level again, to remain firmly rooted and unshakable. Nonetheless, even if one has not yet achieved this steadfastness, every act of spiritual uplift and yearning toward God is profoundly precious in the eyes of Hashem, despite the fact that one may later fall again. And yet, the wicked son refuses to accept this path, questioning instead, what is this service to you? What is this service to you? That is, what is the value of this worship to you, since you do not remain at the elevated spiritual level to which you have reached? And then we say to him, Pesach hu ladonai. That is the answer to the Rasha. We say to the Rasha, to the quote-unquote son who says, the only worthy spiritual practice is the practice in which you see constant growth and that you're always there. The only thing worthwhile is resistance or spiritual elevation that has no fluctuation. There's no room for fluctuation, says the evil, quote-unquote, the Rasha, in this reading of this 21st century Hasidic Rebbe. He's saying that that's indeed the question of the Rasha. Ma avodah zot lachem. What is this service to you? He reads as, what is this service to you, this spiritual practice that's going to shul, this being human that is always like, I'm not interested in something that is like here today, gone tomorrow. It's kind of a beautiful reading on the Rasha. The Rasha is searching for permanence. But we answer the Rasha, who is not evil now, but just actually deeply earnest and mistaken about the nature of spiritual practice. We say this is a Pesach offering, meaning the nature of Pesach offering is that just like God jumped, we also jump. We go up and we go down. We don't stay in one spot all the time, and we sometimes fall. It's true. The significance of passing over, how deeply precious this is in the eyes of Hashem. Precisely this form of worship, continually pesaching, leaping, even if one falls, is ultimately enables one to reach the level, right, where you are a bit more stable, a bit more permanent. It takes time. And then he says, and I'm not going to get into all of the next verses, but here's a brilliant reading of, for those of you who followed the Passover story in the text, at one point, Pharaoh says to Moses, I'll let you go. Who is going? Mi vami ha'olchin. Who are the ones who are going to go? Mi vami. And this particular teacher quotes another teacher who says that question from Pharaoh, who and who, comes back to the Mi yaleh b'har Adonai, who will rise up and who will stand firm, the two who's. That Moshe responds to Pharaoh, who says, who's going to go? Who and who? And he says, you know who's going to go? All of us go. Because all of us are young people, are older people, meaning when we're older, meaning with wisdom and experience, and we have more insight, and when we're younger and we're more immature, all of us are needed in service of God. All of our temporal, right, states, when we're high, when we're low, when we're clear, when we're unclear, all of it is a part of being a Pesacher, right? I'm going to end because I feel like there are two big pieces that I wanted to teach that I definitely will not have time, and I want to hear your insight. But I want to end with the last source, sorry, Caroline, which is source number 11, which gets back to Jay and his question about, and it ties in beautifully with like the first Passover and the future Passover, which will also right, which we talked about. One second, before we do that, let me just say one last thing about jumping and skipping. It's clear, and this also comes back to Jay about the matzah and everything. It's clear that at least in one source that I found, that this jumping is not without some spiritual limping. There's one modern source that uses the word in Hebrew for limping is pishaut. To be a pisach is somebody who limps.
Jacob, when he becomes.
And Jacob, but the word there is not limping, but it's soleya. Jacob is limping for sure. But there's one modern commentator who says that this, and this is really, I never saw this before, and it really hit me like a ton of bricks. He said that matzah actually is not an ideal, it's not the most nourishing thing you could possibly imagine. And the reason why we eat matzah is because we had to rush. And that rushing was directly related to God's descent, as it were, in jumping. Right? God jumped over the homes and then said, hurry up and leave. And in that way, he said that we had to rush, but that rushing led to a kind of limping, which is reflected in the matzah. Matzah is kind of limping bread, he said. Matzah is like bread that had to rush. So there's a kind of, its gait, G-A-I-T, is a little bit off slightly. It doesn't fully nourish you. And that's why we only have it for 7 days a year. He said that sometimes when God rushes us, as it were, in the process, and in our response to it is we have to be willing to sacrifice the run, like the full run, the full preparedness, because that's what's required in that moment. And that way, God's jumping demands us to jump, but that can also lead to a kind of limp, a kind of slightly spiritually malformed, right? Like you can feel like sometimes God asks of you to jump in faith in a moment that you do, but then it leaves you slightly wounded. And that your time then in the future becomes, you then find you return to your more natural cadence and pacing so that you can integrate what happened quickly. And I love that too, because it felt like sometimes we have insights that take us 20 years to unpack. And that the result of that spiritual demand that is placed on us is immense. And we're up to the task. We also jump along, we limp along, we run, even though we can't run at that point. We're not ready to run. But we try to keep up with God's pace. And it's great, but it's not without remainder, he says. And that's symbolized by the matzah, which I never saw. The matzah is not actually the ideal state of bread. It's breadis interruptus, I would say. It's like bread interrupted. It's like liberation and joy and abundance interrupted, but it's necessary, right? And sometimes you have to live on that matzah for a little bit because that's what's demanded of that moment's right speed and pacing. And it can happen in historical moments that are accelerated, and then it takes us generations to unpack it. And I'll say this now, without political, I'm not saying this to fight with anybody. I'm not saying this because everything in my mind comes back to Israel, God forbid. I'm not only thinking about Israel 24/7 all the time. But in many ways, the nascent, right, national homeland of the Jewish people was an example of a jump and a dilug. Right? 1948 happened. It was, of course, we 2,000 years reading about it. The actual nation state is a baby, and it's being asked. It was asked to deal with very complex questions at such a quick rate, and with such rapidity, and it's such life and death circumstances constantly, and it's of course limping at times for sure. It's constantly. I'd be the first person to admit that it's made huge mistakes, and you don't have to be, a politically savvy person to know that. Every nation makes mistakes, but limping forward, right, to find like a natural rhythm is how I think about it. Now, the last teaching here is very personal, and it brings together everything that we just said, and it's the first teaching of Tzaddik HaKohen of Lublin, one of my favorite Hasidic Torahs, and it helps to explain why we had to rush during our time in Egypt, and now we go slowly. He says, Reshit Knisat Adam, which is source number 11. Source number 11 is Reshit Knisat Adam la'avodat Hashem tzarich liyot b'chipazon k'mo shematzinu b'Pesach Mitzrayim shehaya nochal b'chipazon v'lev Pesach Dorot. Says when you start serving God, it has to be in the way of hurriedness, the way that we left Egypt. מפני שההתחלה לנתק עצמו מכל תאוות העולם הזה שהוא מקושר בהם צריך לשמור הרגע שמתעורר בו רצון השם ולחפוץ על אותו רגע למהר לצאת מהם ואולי יוכל. He says, for one begins to cut oneself off from this world, from one's addictions and habits to which one is connected, one must be aware of the moment wherein the desire to serve God awakens. And one must rush to that moment and hurry to escape. Maybe it's still possible. In other words, you have to chapa rein, as they say. Like when you want to break a habit or you want to change something, you have to hurry up. The window opens and you have to jump through. That's right. And in Egypt, the window opened and they said, we can't take our time. We got to rush. Now is the moment. It's like, there's a great poem from Mary Oliver like that. Like you saw the moment and you left. Right? The moment was there and you left.
The
right?
Journey, I think it's
the
called.
journey.
Yeah.
So, but he says, but in the future, once you're outside of the gravitational pull of that addiction, that habit, that relationship, that thing, you can slow down, you can take your time, you can relax, you can savor, you can tell the story. So the inertia and what's required, right, the centrifugal force required to release the atmosphere, to get out of the atmosphere, has to be the chipazon. Hurry up. And in this way also it becomes a source in many traditions later on, that the way we left Egypt is the way of not allowing a moment to become a chametz. That when an opportunity to do a mitzvah happens, the language of the rabbis is, mitzvah habali atcha al tachmitzena. That a mitzvah that comes into your hands, you have an opportunity to do a good deed, don't let it leaven. Don't let it leaven. Right? You say to yourself, I have an idea, I'm going to call my mother, I'm going to call my father, I'm going to call my child, and then that idea arrives, it's an opportunity to leave Egypt, so grab it quickly, right? You have a sense like, I know with absolute clarity that this job is killing me, or that this relationship is killing me, right? If you wait, you're not going to go. And so along comes the Torah and says to you, like that guy with the bungee jumpers on the YouTube videos that I can't even